Welcome to the William Campbell Contemporary Gallery in Fort Worth. My name is Andrew Martin, and this is another edition of In the Artist's Words. Today I'm joined by the artist Steve Murphy. Steve, hello.
Hello.
And Steve is going to be, this is Steve's second full show at the William Campbell Gallery in Fort Worth, his first solo show. Let's get to know Steve a little bit better. He hails from Port Arthur, Texas, where he was born. Though he moved to Houston in the early 70s. So he is a real, authentic Texan artist that we're having join us today. And he is mostly a sculptor, though he does do other kinds of art, but mostly sculpture is what he specializes in. And we are going to get to know this latest batch of work from his studio. So let's take a look at the first work right now. Steve, let's talk about this work. I love its monumentality. First of all, it's called Is There Something More? And it's made from welded steel. Is welded steel one of your favorite sort of materials to work in, to sculpt in?
This current body of work is based off two basic formats. One is a lead over wood, and of course these welded works, which are fabricated in a fabrication shop for me. The lead pieces are made in my studio. The welded pieces are brought to my studio in pretty much a finished condition, and I put all the patinas and the final grinding and sanding to prepare them for the patinas.
And this color, this patina, how do you arrive at this particular color? I love this patina.
It's a chemical-based procedure that you can purchase from steel fabrication companies that's applied, and it all depends on how you regulate it, how you control it to get the results that you want out of it. Each artist will come up with something different, as they do with any other material that they work with.
Did you say before that the steel arrived to you in this shape already, or you actually pounded it out?
It comes in this shape, in this form. It's fabricated from flat plate, bent and welded and cut to my prescribed dimensions and configurations, which I fabricate. I have these pieces fabricated after I draw them up on a CAD program.
You have an engineering background, don't you?
I do, yes.
What is it about this particular shape that's almost very wing-like in a way? To me, very light and airy, though it's made from steel. What is it about this shape that pleases you?
Well, I always start out a new piece with a profile on the CAD system. Once I'm comfortable with the profile, I then consider it as two planes back to back. At that point, I determine how I want to open those planes up to determine what the final piece is going to look like. Once that is kind of arrived at, then I decide how I want to treat the edges. Do I want a flat surface here? Do I want a knife edge? Do I want a curved edge? And I start playing with those elements. And that's a reoccurring theme in all the work that I do. Basically those limited elements of sculpture, if you want to say.
Are you, I think I mentioned to you before that this reminded me in terms of shape and the color of the patina of Richard Serra's great sort of works. Is Richard Serra, has he ever been a role model for you in terms of his artistry?
Well, I think he is for any sculptor that works in steel or metal. But the thing about Serra is there's no way any of us are ever going to attempt the scale that he works in. And so yes, there are influences from him and many other sculptors and painters and artists around the world, but he is definitely an influence.
Wonderful. Steve, let's move on to another work. Steve, let's talk about this next work. It is called No Power in Pride, and it is done in lead over wood, as opposed to the other work that we just saw that was done in steel over wood. Contrast the differences in working between the two media, lead versus
They're
steel.
two totally separate ways of working. As I mentioned before, the steel pieces are fabricated from flat plate steel from drawings that I generate to the fabricator. These in turn are done in my studio and carved from solid pieces of wood. The geometry is laid out from the computer layouts like I would for the steel, but then that's where it all changes. Because I go out and purchase dried wood in the rough dimensions that I'm going to need. Sometimes I do glue pieces together, but typically it's a solid piece of wood. And the pieces are all carved from that piece of wood and then wrapped in lead sheeting.
And the lead sheeting that you work with, is it very thin, or is it a rather thick sort of layering of lead that you put over the wood?
It's about 3/32 thick, very thin.
Is it easy to work with, or?
It's like working with leather. You can carve it and roll it and bend it and twist it like you can leather. The only thing it doesn't spring back like leather does.
Do you get a different sort of artistic pleasure and reward from working with lead versus steel?
Oh, absolutely, because I'm doing the whole piece, the entire piece, and watching the form unfold. The lead coating is a finish to the piece for me. Bringing that piece, that form out of the wood is what I really enjoy seeing and doing. And I do like putting the finish on it because that's where the real beauty starts to shine through on the form. Once it's proved itself, then you put the coating on it, and that's when it really starts to take off.
What is the sort of wood that you like to work with initially?
Typically I use poplar, kiln-dried poplar, because I can pick it up at the local hardwoods supplier, and I don't have to worry about it warping or twisting or bending or checking. Very stable.
I noticed that this particular kind of wing-like shape, that is somewhat similar in shape to the other work that we looked at just before. Is it something that in this current batch of work that you've presenting to us, is it something that you're fascinated with currently, or you've always been very interested in this kind of shape?
I think what you're probably picking up on is the oval or the ellipse, which I continually reuse in different forms and formats, which probably is the wing feature that you're indicating.
Yes.
And then the opening up of the two profiles that we talked about in the steel piece also kind of lends itself to a winged kind of configuration. But what I think is really important is that people can bring their own reference to these pieces. You think it's a wing, other people might consider it something else, and that's how the titles also kind of play into them, in that I want to be somewhat ambiguous, but have everything reference to another element within the piece. So if someone walks up and sees this piece, they don't have a real ground of what it is, so they start to put the pieces together themselves. And that's when the real poetry of a piece of sculpture comes together, is when people come to it and get a different understanding or what they believe the piece to be about. And that's when I think the artist is doing their job, is when that magic starts to happen.
What gives you the most pleasure from being a sculptor as opposed to being a painter or a drawer or any kind of other sort of artistic expression that you pursue? What is it about being a sculptor that is most pleasurable for you?
You know, I'm not really sure, but there are two distinct methods of working as far as the way I work in painting and sculpture. Painting is more of an immediate thing that you get those aha moments of like, wow, that was just fantastic, I didn't expect that. Whereas sculpture is a more studied, analyzed way of working, in that you don't want to have any happy accidents or unhappy accidents when you're at the end of a 6-foot tall piece. So it's very planned out. But then when you get that object at the end, it just tells the whole story that you were doing it right all the way through. Whereas the painting actually gives you an excitement of the discovery as you work through it. These are approving of what you thought would be appropriate.
Well, I think just looking around this room and the other gallery, that you've certainly succeeded at planning what you wanted to do and what you wanted to achieve.
Well, thank you very much.
Steve Murphy, thank you so much. This has been another edition of In the Artist's Words from the William Campbell Contemporary Gallery in Fort Worth. My name is Andrew Martin.